Welcome to the Open Air Podcast. My name is Devang and Simon, and I'm joined, as always, by Mr. Simon Bush, a very special edition of the Open Air Podcast this week. I feel like Roger Federer kind of stole your thunder because you had been working on a sort of rock opera dedicated to one Fed that we were going to release soon.
Sure. It's news to me, but I'm more than happy to take the suggestion and begin working on it. I'm dressed all in black as a mark of respect to the great Mr. Federer, not to the Queen, who, the day that this is released, will be having a state-sanctioned funeral, whilst the majority of the British public are suffering their heating bills being trebled.
This is very off topic, but I have to know, Bush, do you think David Beckham was actually in line, or did you bud in line? Or like how photo op-esque was that?
I don't know, to be honest. I don't really care. I saw some interesting stuff written. I saw some tweets around how people getting mad at the idea that some people were cutting in line to ahead of them was a good radicalization process for them, because it might be the first time they've realized in their life that that's how the monarchy works in general, which I thought was very amusing.
That's excellent. So well done. Well, we won't talk about the Queen for the most part, hopefully, on this show, because we have big news to discuss. It's not breaking news by any means. I think if you're a tennis fan, you had to see this coming from a long way away. Yet, still, when it happened, I felt a jolt go through me, Simon, of emotion, of sadness. Roger Federer will retire from tennis after the Laver Cup coming up this week. Thoughts immediately? I know we all thought or knew this was coming, and perhaps some of us, the more gullible of us, thought there was one more run left, and maybe he would go back to Wimbledon and try on a severely restructured knee, try to win another major. But it happened. But I'm curious what you went through when you saw the news, because I kind of went through it in a way that I thought was unexpected.
Yeah, I think it's interesting parallels, isn't it? And just coming off the back of us saying we're not going to talk about the Queen, I'm just going to talk about the Queen for a second, is that you have some moments of reflection in your life. And I think for a lot of people, why the Queen's passing has meant so much to them is that we never really stop to think, and we never really stop to have these points in our life where we can think about what either figures or the point in our lives are. And I think that's kind of where I find myself with Roger Federer, which was that it gave me a moment to stop and reflect that he basically has been my entire tennis watching. I can think of a few moments prior to him winning Wimbledon, but other than that, he's basically been a constant through my entire love of this sport. And I think he's so foundational to that it was an interesting week. I think on my side of things, though, I have my own thoughts about him and what he's sort of meant to me as a fan. But I've definitely come to terms with him being retired in the same way that we talked about with Serena Williams being retired as well, long before the actual event, is that I and I've said this on the podcast before, so apologies for repeating myself, but I had him retired from the moment that he lost to Hubie Hurkacz at Wimbledon. I always considered that was his last match and had come to terms with that for a very long time. So I found myself being, a little surprised, a little shocked, but at the same time, kind of just at peace with it in a weird kind of way. Does that make sense?
It does. No, I totally get that. I think if you remember, and we talked about this a bit on the Discord, there was obituaries being written for Fed's career in 2009 when he won the French Open, or 2010, right? Like there was the idea that you were supposed to retire at a certain age if you're a tennis player. By 30, you're supposed to be done. And I think what Roger ended up being was a wonderful chaperone through an era-defining time of tennis where things really did change, and everything was pushed to a new extreme, to a new height that we had not seen before. And he was sort of the guide, and others surpassed him maybe in terms of titles and accomplishments. But I think he ushered in a new wave of thinking of the sport, a new wave of watching the sport, and a new way to draw other people in that I think was unprecedented and also unexpected considering what we were losing at that time as well, Bush. If we want to take a trip through memory lane, I think the fact that he emerged after 2003 as the vanguard was quite surprising because it felt like there wasn't going to be that kind of person. So I understand your emotions because I did feel like he was a guide for me, and so almost like a North Star in the sense that he was always there. And if you were wanting to see something that to lift you, emotionally, and we'll get to some of these specific moments, he was usually the guy for me. I think reading what Ivan Ljubicic, his coach towards the end of his career, was saying about last year, Simon, and that loss to Hurkacz, he knew he was done when he lost to Felix in Halle. He knew it wasn't going to be possible to win Wimbledon. They were hoping for a miracle, but at that moment then, when he lost to Felix Auger-Aliassime a couple of weeks before Wimbledon, that was it. So I think a long time coming, sure, but hell, we held on for quite a long time. And I think what was nice, though, is now that we do have some finality, we can kind of take a look back and a walk through some of the moments that meant the most to us.
No, totally. I think it's a fascinating point, and I will come on to the personal moments in a second, but I just wanted to make the point about longevity, and it's something that I guess we'll come on to in part 2 as well, which is what are the career-defining elements of Roger Federer's career in the sense of how have people chosen to address his retirement. And I watched Pete Sampras play Carlos Moya in 2011, and I think Sampras was around the same age as Federer is now, so in early 40s. Sampras looked like an old man playing.
Like struggling across the court.
Genuinely shocking watching him play. And then you realize that Federer is trying to make, or was trying to make a comeback at the same age. And you're like, well, it kind of is understandable that he's not going to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think so, man.
Let's get on to the personal stories then, because I have said numerous times that I think the next evolution of podcasting in our medium is a lot more personal stories. There's a lot more people trying to play less amateur journalism and more about people's own personal reflections within our sport. And I think that's a really good moment for us to start with this, because when we discuss the career of someone, I think it's mostly about the moments that they have touched us in certain ways and where we were and who we were watching it with and the conversations around it. And I think for me, the first moment, really genuinely the first real moment of me falling in love with tennis was watching Roger Federer win that Wimbledon final in 2003. I remember watching it at my aunt and uncle's house and just being, stunned by watching the display of tennis, watching Mark Philippoussis bombing serves down and falling in love with a sport. And I think if we're really going to circle something, at least for me, it's that final. And Roger Federer was a huge part of that.
The beginning, right? The follow-up to the victory over Pete at this tournament, the consolidation of will he make it? Yes, he will. And I found it remarkable. I watched this final with my dad, and my dad loved Fed's game from the beginning, but I think not a pirate, but he had a look to him that I thought was unique, and my dad possibly wasn't a fan back then, but the word he kept using this week was class, and like the amount of class he exuded and the way he carried himself. But I also kind of appreciated the rough around the edges Fed, and this was maybe one of the last glimpses of that version of him, where not everything was put together. It wasn't a complete package. There wasn't just this remarkable put-togetherness that you saw in a human being that just walked on a tennis court and obliterated people for 5 years. It wasn't that yet. This was Fed with some issues and still this glittering game that took him past just a series of bomb servers on the way to that title.
How much do you remember of tennis before that final of Wimbledon? Like, you are 6 months older than me, so not much in the grand scheme of things. Mm-hmm. I'm curious, do you have many memories before then? Because this really was... I don't know, maybe Federer himself and the aura that was created. Because I remember bits and pieces from 2002. I remember Leighton Hewitt winning the title. I remember Henman's run, fractions of things before that. I don't really remember 2001 a whole lot of Ivanovic and Raptor. But do you have memories before that?
I do, and it's mostly US Open centric, and it's mostly Pete and Andre and early Serena and some Martina Hingis, but it's not photographic by any means. And it took several rewatches via this show or the Sport Chronicle, an old show we used to do, where then I got an idea really of what was going on. But I do recall kind of having this gap to fill, and a generation before me and my dad, who was still watching a lot more tennis back then, sort of waiting for the next person. And there being this issue of we were not sure who it's going to be. And I think Andy Roddick being maybe the choice for the American-centric crowd. But I don't remember Fed being a tantalizing option for a lot of people. And that makes it so remarkable where we ended up, because he's everyone's dream in the sense that he never put a single foot wrong. But I remember back then, he was a goofy Swiss kid who had long hair and a cool bandana and a silkily weird game that looked like it was from a bit of the future, and it kind of was.
It's interesting, isn't it, that both of our memories, we go back to, you look at the early 2000s, so 2001 through 3, is that it was still not quite pre-internet, but definitely pre-globalization in a lot of ways, in that my memories go straight to Wimbledon because that's what I had access to, and it wasn't to the US Open, it wasn't to the Australian Open, because like that just wasn't on my radar when I was that age. But for you, it's different, right? Like it's the US Open was the tournament that was given priority, I would guess, in North America to watch.
Yeah, and I mean, like I was getting up early, but I was probably getting up early to watch cartoons at that time. Like I don't know if I was getting up at 6 a.m. or 8 a.m. in the morning to watch NBC in the late 90s. But I think as I became a sports obsessed teenager and clown, if you want to be uncharitable, and devoted my life to this stuff, Fed was there, right? And I think that this all lined up really well. And as we move forward, Bush, into our next favorite moments, like I think the 2004 season of just ridiculous obliteration, kind of marking the new king in town, or the new man on campus, was absurd. And the people he was beating, I know the soft era BS that I think everyone had fallen in love with it for a time and is now walking back. These are some very formidable guys, Bush, that he was running through in 2004.
Yeah, this is the single best performance on a tennis court I have seen in my life, watching live. And I know there's some debate about that. I don't think I have ever seen a more ridiculous crushing of an opponent in a Grand Slam final than that one of Lleyton Hewitt in 2004 in the US Open. I remember watching it live. So 7 o'clock in New York would have been midnight. So I would have been watching it. I would have had a full year of Fed, of domination, and really fallen in love with that, with his game and the narrative and everything. And then just being utterly stunned that he was able to do this to someone who was ranked inside of the top 5 at the time.
He double bageled him in the finals.
And genuinely, despite the fact that it was 6-love, 7-6, 6-love, it wasn't that close. It wasn't even that close. I think that's the most remarkable thing about it, is that Lleyton Hewitt was extremely lucky to get 6 games. It's a marker of his fighting qualities that it was that close. If you go back and watch the highlights of this, everything you can think of Roger Federer in terms of grace, foot speed, and just an absolute cannon for a forehand. It sounds like a gun has gone on it every time he strikes the ball. And he just overwhelms and devastates Lleyton Hewitt. And to this day, I have still not seen anything that surpasses that in terms of breaking the spirit of another human being on a tennis court in a final. It was remarkable to watch.
I had that same feeling about the 2005 US Open final against Andre, where it was like obviously not prime Andre, not classic Andre, but Andre still. And him just recognizing in real time that this man he's playing is about to obliterate a whole lot of records, and it's totally fine to lose in 4 sets against him. And it was also one of those moments where it looked like Fed was playing a bit in fast forward, like he was playing at 1.5 times speed. Yeah, and Andre is playing at 1 time speed, and it just felt like they weren't playing the same sport at times. And I don't know what your favorite Fed era is, Bush, but I feel like that time kind of gets underappreciated because there was no Novak and Rafa yet, and it gets lost a bit in the pantheon. But it was remarkable to watch someone enter tournaments he was expected to win and do so in ridiculous fashion.
It was fully going for it, Fed. Like in the sense that he was winning points by hitting winners or like committing mass amounts of unforced errors. And I think it was the most free and easy Roger Federer in his entire career, where he just was so arrogant, I guess we can use that terminology, even though, you know, all the things that can be said about him. Just when he walked on the court, He felt like he could hit any shot, and he wanted to finish points in the most aggressive way to break people's spirits. I think 04, 05, 06 is easily the most fun I've ever had in my life watching a single tennis player play, because, like you said, it was on fast forward. It was on fast forward to the point where, insofar as tennis has evolved, where with the rise of level of analytics, with the rise of different speeds of court and all that sort of thing, where it has been more reined in, and the shot level of creativity has been reined in to the point where it's a bit more safe now. It definitely wasn't safe then. And I think that's what I found most attractive about watching this dude play, is that he was trying to kill his opponents. It was just like fucking brutal to watch some of it.
Ruthless. And doing it with a smile on his face. All the compilations you've watched recently, I think there's the clip of him against Andre in Dubai, and he's hitting an insane over-the-shoulder shot, basically, and just laughing. And Andre's like, seriously, man? Like, what? If we fast forward a bit and we have the introduction of the other big two and the people who would become his foils and his greatest rivals, and Rafa and Novak, and Rafa arriving with a resounding bang, beating him in the French Open final in 2006. And Novak beating him in 2007 at the US Open, like, there was obviously some competition, and it wasn't like Fed was rolling over at that time either. He was still collecting his titles. He was still winning his Wimbledons. But I think that 2009 French Open and the way it was done, and the fact that it was done almost on a tightrope bush, where he avoided so many random moments of disaster, including that Tommy Haas match that he should have lost, and the Delpo semifinal in which he's coming back from way down. I don't think I got greater. We'll talk about maybe the 2017 Australian Open is bringing us more joy, but that tournament was a cathartic release that I don't think I've had in sports ever.
I remember watching the Tommy Haas match live, and specifically just being like, this is done. Like, I don't know that he's going to win this match. And everything always gets made of that cross-court forehand when he's down break point and down 2-0 as the defining moment of his career, simply because it was so huge to save that off and then to make that comeback that he did. And I still remember that. I remember it, and it sticks out in my brain of watching it live. And I think that's the power of someone who has the career that he does, is that those moments are so... How many points get played during the course of the year? How many break points get saved? How many moments? And then you have these one small snippets that stick out in your brain above everything else. And it's crazy the way that our brains work, and it's crazy the way that they stick with this, because I remember that moment so clearly, so vividly, where I was sitting, the stakes of it, and my reaction to it. And I think that's testament to how good of a player he was and how invested so many people were at the time.
I mentioned Novak and Rafa came on the scene, but Fed literally made every Grand Slam final in 2006 and 2007. He almost did that in 2008, and then he did it again in 2009. Absurd. Utterly absurd. We're going to keep going. We'll keep going through some of our personal moments, plus the reaction, and then wrap things up with parting shots. Stick with us on Open Arrow. We'll talk to you in a bit. Welcome back to the Open Air Podcast, Federer Retirement Edition, going through Simon and mine's favorite Fed moments through the years. We're going to do a longer Federer deep dive, I think, at some point. Simon, I mentioned that rock opera jokingly, but correct me if I'm wrong, you were writing a sort of history of Fed.
I was trying to do a sort of borderline parody version of Dan Carlin's Hardcore History, but for Roger Federer's career, because I thought it would be quite funny to do it. And then I realized that each of his episodes is like 5.5 hours long, and it's going to be incredibly challenging to get there. But I have most of the material written for it. I just need to record it at some point. So if you would like to hear that, then maybe let me know and give me the encouragement to get it over the line, because I'm not sure I have it in me to do a full 5.5 hour recording otherwise.
We got a few more maybe non-slam moments, Simon, that stick out for you. Tour finals 2011 being one of them.
Yeah, because it was the only time that I got to see Roger Federer play live. And I saw him play Rafael Nadal. I've told this story on the podcast as well before, but I'll just quickly do some revision. I was down doing work experience for the BBC at the time, got to meet the whole crew, got to meet Tim Henman, Sue Barker, and got to meet a very young, inexperienced David Law as well. Good job he never went on to do anything as well. And come on, it's funny, everyone. Got to see Roger Federer play Rafael Nadal in that infamous straight sets whipping of the great Spaniard. He beat him 6-love, bailed him in the second set. It was Federer at full flight. And I think the thing that I took away from that was just the crowd's level of amazement at what they were seeing. Like, it's very rare that you go inside of an arena or inside of a stadium and just have so much love directed towards two individuals, and specifically one player, because it came very apparent very quickly in watching that match that Nadal was not up to Federer's standard. I think Nadal was carrying an injury. When is Nadal not carrying an injury? But I think in that moment, watching Federer just absolutely wipe the floor with him was an incredible sight to witness. And I think it's one of those things that after he's retired, you kind of feel a little bit sad that you never got to see more of that live in person. And I think those memories are ones that will stick with me because I was able to see him and I was able to see the two of them play. It was amazing, Dev. I'm glad I got to see it.
You got to watch two goats play. I got to watch two goats play. I saw Roger once against Marin Cilic, who I'm referring to as a goat in this context because he is one and a slam winner. But I saw it once as well. I think I've told the story before as well, but it was Toronto and it went really late and transit was literally shut down at that point in the city. So shuttle buses were waiting to take people home, but they all stayed because, again, even back then, Simon, in 2015, the idea was maybe this is it. And I'm not sure if we're going to see him again, and this might be our last chance, so we should stay. If we call ourselves tennis fans, this is the least we can do. It'll be worth it. And it was. Of course it was. But I think what's funny to me is, like, I don't know if Open Era exists without Roger Federer either, because I feel like our coming together and our friendship that was forged was also built off Roger Federer.
Agreed. Yeah, I think that's legitimately true. I don't know that this podcast exists without that dude. Like, simply because of the place that we used to work at and what I think our friendship was formed over. It was watching live tennis in the middle of, should you say a suboptimal environment? Do you think that's fair?
No, I mean, the fact that we were able to have things on and like watch random sports was not bad. It was... I don't know why we were allowed, really. Like, did we need to have access to cable TV at this point to watch tennis? I'm not complaining, but in the hard days, or the days of meetings that never ended, it was quite nice to turn on the TV and watch a 1000 event at Paris-Bercy for some reason.
I think it's cool, right? Because we're in a time period where I think so much of the workforce is wrestling with those ideas of social connection that were once formulated through your workplace. And as work has evolved throughout the pandemic and it's not really settled into a regular routine again, is that some people's social connections have been lost because it was primarily driven by work. So if your office has gone fully remote or it's more flexible in terms of when people are there, it's one of those situations that you're going to have to get your social connections some other way. And I think that's one thing that I look back on our time at EA is that we were able to spend a shitload of time together watching sport and formulating a bond, which I think will stay with us for the rest of our lives. So it's kind of cool that sticks out. And we watched many a Federer match. We watched many of a 250 level nonsense together. So I'm glad that existed.
Well, I mean, it coincided as well with that final Fed peak and the fact that he did seemingly store up enough for two more pretty ridiculous years in 2017 and 2018. And I think that French Open in 2017 was, alongside the 2009 French Open, one of my favorite moments as a tennis fan and as a Fed fan, and that Nadal final and Federer doing this the hard way and digging deep and beating Rafa, yes, on a hard court, in a way that I think had been a question mark over his head for a long time. Watching it in the middle of the night in Vancouver and watching it knowing that we were living and dying through every match bush at work and watching through the day and hoping and really trying to guess who he would have to play. It was scintillating and it was thoroughly rewarding. And I really didn't expect a few more slams to come off the back of that, but that's how he got to 20.
I think there's so few times in sport that we genuinely get surprised. And I think that 2017 run and his comeback was genuinely so surprising to a lot of people, because in sport, you start to get into the habit of patterns. Like, this player is good, this player is bad, this player is supposed to beat this player, this team is supposed to beat this player, like they play like this, etc., etc. And you formulate those habits in your brain. So when he comes back in 2017 and he's like, wait a minute, he can hit a fucking backhand and stay with Rafael Nadal. Like, wait a minute, that one-handed backhand doesn't look so weak anymore. Where's this coming from? It's very, very strange. And then to actually sort of put it all together, to have the run that he did, I think it was utterly... To me, it was really, really surprising. It was really surprising because I thought he was never going to win a Grand Slam again. I think it was such a nice coda to his career in a lot of ways. And it obviously is that now. We can look back at it and realize that it was that final hurrah. But like, just in itself, how incredible of an achievement it is to be able to do what he did in 17 and get back to world number one. Astonishing, Dev.
We arrive, I think, at the end, and one final push to number one in 2018 at Rotterdam, the Richard Krajicek special.
Awful tournament. Maybe not the tournament itself, but his involvement in it. God, it was a slog. He was nowhere near. I think every single match that he played, he looked absolutely shit and still managed to play in that tournament and get across the line just to achieve that number one ranking. I remember we weren't doing the podcast. We were doing the Sport Chronicle at that time, and I remember us talking about it and just being like, Jesus Christ, this guy looks washed. How is he world number one? And I think that tournament, he just played it to get enough points to get the ranking back.
We'll skip over 2021 Wimbledon because we discussed off top how I feel like that was a true sign physically. He was not going to be able to hold up. But I think the real final salvo, you could say, Simon, was the 2020 Australian Open, the semifinal run there. The ridiculous wins along the way, the Millman match, I think going down as one of our favorites, John Millman in front of the show, Millmania, causing lots of problems for Fed at the US Open, where we watched Fed sweat more than we had ever seen him before, and truly signaling alarm bells for the wider Fed, the Federati, as they like to be called. But to go from Millman to the tennis Sandgren match, in which... no shame in the game losing, Fed, and it's okay, but to lose to tennis Sandgren could not have been accepted. He spared us from a Novak Djokovic tennis Sandgren semifinal, Simon. We owe him a lot for that.
Well, I think that one sticks out. That run will probably be one of the lasting memories I have of Roger Federer, and I think people are going to be surprised by that in a random quarterfinal against tennis Sandgren and a fourth round against John Millman, just simply because, like, he was clearly injured. He had no business beating any of these players. He was completely wiped, I think, from a physical standpoint in the heat and everything. And he was still managing to beat players who were ranked inside of the top 50. Like, incredible tennis players against a dude who refused to hang it up. Just hung in matches and found ways to win through incredibly creative shot making and incredible will to win. That was just... I think that is a microcosm of his entire career, which is just finding ways to win when he absolutely had no business doing it, and refusing to retire. And I think that's a really good marker of his longevity. And I think all the plaudits that go into that are very well deserved.
I wanted to believe in that first set against Novak in the semifinals when it got to the tiebreak. I'm like, maybe. Of course not. Of course not. Well, Fed made his announcement. I think, just regarding the announcement itself, I thought it was really well done, Simon. The video along with the note and Fed narrating the note and the people he mentioned and the things he mentioned were very Roger Federer, and having his parents around him and Mirka and his kids, and it all kind of clicked. And I think seeing the the acknowledgement that this was it on his face, and the happiness that he exuded as well was comforting, because I think in a lot of these situations, perhaps athletes are not able to retire on their own terms. And I'm not sure if he even is doing that based on him citing his knee not being able to get back to where it was. But even with that known, he looked okay with how it's going to end. And the fact that we have the Laver Cup and we have his greatest rivals being there on his team with Borg there, it feels kind of right as well.
I think what Severin Luthi said when he was interviewed during the course, I think it was Eurosport that he was interviewed for, I think maybe an outlet like that. And Luthi basically saying that, he's fucked. He's done. That's kind of what I think the summarization
Your best boy
is.
is someone who's been with you forever and through thick and thin can only lay it down that sweetly.
He's done, man. Like he can't move anymore. He can't play at a high level. And I think we always knew that, didn't we? Is that he was only gonna hang it up, and he was only gonna retire when he felt like he couldn't compete at the top of the game anymore, and he felt like he could continually win Grand Slams, and he just wasn't able to do that anymore. I think in his mind's eye, when you're struggling to beat Dan Evans with the greatest respect, and like massively respected Dan Evans, like those are players that Federer felt like he shouldn't be struggling against, and I think that's where his mind was finally made up in a lot of ways.
Saw the outpouring of support. I think Serena's post was fantastic. The one time Serena did mention the word retirement was involving Roger, which I think is also fitting. But the fact that they shared so many moments together, Simon, and being the same age and being on this trip together, and I think Serena mentioned that, but that relationship is remarkable to me, that they basically went through their careers together alongside each other as the people were chasing, the people were going after. There has to be some shared understanding between them that goes beyond just tennis.
It has to be, doesn't there? There's a lot of shared experiences there, isn't there? And their careers in some ways are equally parallel, and the reverence they talk with each other about each other is nice to see. It's always amazing to hear Serena Williams say, like, no, Roger Federer is the GOAT. And Roger Federer is like, nah.
She's the GOAT.
Yeah, pretty obviously here. I think it's a funny discussion in general about, I mean, hearing Serena Williams say that is always worthy of retrospective and worthy of debate to see whether or not that is evaluated. I mean, I'm happy to sit here on the record and say that Serena Williams is the greatest of all time. I think that's of any tennis player. I feel that's not a particularly controversial thing to say, but it is interesting hearing her say that she would give that nod to Federer.
I did a double take as well, but I do think it's because they go deep, and I know she's close with Rafa and Novak, and I get that, but I think they share something a bit deeper, and I thought that message was fantastic. I thought they were all great. I mean, Rafa's is great, Novak's is great. The Novak, including some of his losses in the photo carousel, which I think is important when you're doing something like this. But I don't think they were extremely close at the beginning, but they worked on it. And I don't think there is this animus there. And I think that also goes to shared experiences and being on this weird trip together where they travel the world playing some of the biggest matches of all time together. And there had to be winners and losers, and they were on both sides quite a few times. So I think, of course, there's going to be some shared understanding there. Carlos Alcaraz, Simon, who I find his admiration of Roger interesting. I mean, it maybe didn't make sense, but it does make a lot of sense because Carlos is not alone. But his reference, Andre Agassi's post was also really nice. I think Andre also acknowledging that Roger changed the standard, or he set a new standard, and Billie Jean King's as well, I thought was really heartfelt. Did any others stand out to you?
Those are ones that I also circled. The Agassi one really got to me, actually. I think I've spoken many times in this podcast of my admiration for Andre Agassi and seeing the way that he doesn't talk very often, does he, about the sport, and doesn't really get involved a huge amount.
Not at all.
So to see him pop out of the woodwork for this was kind of nice to see. I enjoyed the Conan O'Brien one, encouraging Roger Federer to go into the podcast world. That is a side note to Tony Godsick and the team. If Roger is available, we'd love to have him on.
Love to have him, yeah.
Yeah, we'd love to have him. He could do parting shots. We'll let him have free reign on that.
We're all kitted out and on
whatever you want, man. I'll buy as many fucking shoes as you want.
We're ready and willing. Willing.
Absolutely. I enjoyed the Sachin Tendulkar one as well. For some bizarre reason, they seem to have a friendship as well. Federer seems to crop up all over the places with these great figures.
Global. Yeah. That's the other thing. It's like, I think across sports, that kind of respect, and we saw it with Serena as well, but I love that as well. I think tennis is a massive thing, and like we should pretend that it's like a small, like little train that could kind of situation, but I do enjoy when it crosses over and seeing other sportsmen and other athletes of great acclaim sending their tribute as well. I think it shows the standard that Roger set repeatedly. I do want to touch on the comparisons, Bush. And sorry, before I do that, Stan Wawrinka's message as well. What a time to be Stan Wawrinka coming up in the Swiss tennis scene and being like, I am really good. I'm sick at this sport. Oh yeah, Roger's there. I thought Stan handled all of that kind of shit extremely well. And being able to maintain a relationship with Fed and obviously be super close while also observing your peer kind of set impossible marks and remaining okay and persisting, I think that shows what Stan's all about as well.
I mean, outlived him though, didn't he? Outlived him in tennis. So who gets the last laugh on this one?
I wanted to get to the comparisons because Serena obviously retired a few weeks ago, and once again, it's super fitting that they leave the sport so close together. But did you recognize that perhaps there is a different tone or there's a different way both of these announcements were received?
I did. I think that's a really interesting point in evaluating how both of them were spoken about and the language that was used and the focus that was placed upon it. And I think there's been some pretty interesting thought pieces written throughout the course of the week about what the framing of Roger Federer's retirement is and what people will remember him by. And they are so close between Williams and Federer that it is an interesting evaluation point to say how Serena was treated in her retirement and the things that she was spoken of, and in the same way that Roger Federer was. I think one of the major ones, of course, is that race does play a huge factor in this. And I think Serena Williams was a figure that was outside of the sport in a lot of other ways, from a social justice perspective and also from the perspective of having to fight against multiple levels of institutional problems. Federer certainly did not have that. He was much more of a golden child and much more of it being a more quote unquote like graceful rise in terms of him being accepted, I would think, by the sporting community in general. So I think Serena had a lot more things to overcome to get to where she was, not just from a financial standpoint, but everything else going into the sport. And I think that was hinted at, and I think that was understood by the thought pieces that were written. But it was still fascinating to look at it, Dev.
Yeah, and I think it should be acknowledged. Like, Roger had a lot of advantages afforded to him along this rise. And I think the story of him being able to control his temper and get over being a bit of a brat is mentioned in a positive way. Like, he's eschewing some childish tendencies and becoming this great man and someone we can look up to. And then I see Serena maybe not afforded the same opportunities to evolve and grow and move past some incidents. And I think that goes to what you were saying, Simon, where I think Serena was facing more than just her adversary on the other side of the court. There was literal institutional roadblocks that she had to overcome, and I don't think Fed had to. I think Fed was able to rely on the beauty and grace of his game and win the masses that way, where I think Serena did it in uncomparable situations. So while I do think it is worth acknowledging that they rose together and shared a lot of similar things along the way and being in the limelight and being these megastars, I think Serena really, I don't think there is a comparable. There's no comp for me, Simon. And I think that's where I could talk about Fed and be like, there's people who remind me of him in terms of these great figures of sport. But I feel like that's why Serena's untouchable.
Yeah, I think so. So let's close this segment. And Devang is right. We will come back to both Serena Williams and Roger Federer. They deserve at least their own episodes to talk about their history and everything. But what is your, if you had to pick one thing, like, what is your memory of him, of his career? Like, how does it sit with you? And like, is there one aspect to his game, or is that Is it like the longevity? Is it the shot making? Which is it? Because I'm curious to know yours, because I think I know mine. So I'm curious to know yours.
Boy, that's a big question. This might sound weird, but I think his footwork for me will be the thing that I remember the most. And to see those videos where they just stay on his side of the court and they zoom in on his feet, and we're talking peak Fed, so maybe 2004, 2005, 2006. Watching the way this man moved on the court was hypnotic, and I don't think it's been replicated. I know there's better movers out there, but I fell in love with the way he moved around the court, and he made it look easy, but it wasn't at all. And I think that underrated aspect of Fed was his work ethic and his fitness, and it was shown through footwork.
That's a good answer. I was going to say the creativity, and effectively him being just, is brave too strong of a word? I don't know whether brave is the right phraseology that I'm looking for, but effectively like someone who is a risk taker.
I think you kind of hit on this as well, but he had a level of hubris to him that I think he was, if his shot wasn't on, he'd make it on. And he'd do it in really big moments too, whether it be break points or potentially championship points. And you're like, well, was that a good idea? But this was the ethos he played with to a maddening degree at times.
I just think sport so often does not reward risk takers. It goes out of its way, especially modern day sport, in terms of with the rise of analytics and patterns of play and everything that says like, no, you're going to lose this point if you try and do this. So definitely roll it cross court and stay in the fight. I think someone who has the ability to just be so aggressive, be so creative, and take risks in a way that was rewarded to the highest degree. That's the thing that sticks out for me. And I'm sure people think I'm ridiculous when I say this every time, but if a player comes up and tries stuff, I will support them wholeheartedly. Absolutely. Like, even if you go down swinging, it takes so much bravery to be able to do that, because everything around you, every institution is telling you, don't do that. Absolutely play it safe and don't be the aggressor. And he was someone who embodied the fact that, no, I am going to be creative. I am going to take risks, and I am going to go for my shots. And I think that was the thing that I will really remember about him.
We'll leave it there. When we come back, parting shots, some real tennis TM, Davis Cup, Chennai, all of that coming up next. Welcome back to the Open Era Podcast. We're back for parting shots, Simon. We talked about Fed at length. It's time for some coverage of what actually happened on the tennis courts this week. Davis Cup is back, baby! Woo! On a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being extremely jacked and 1 being Davis what? How excited were you for this stage of Davis Cup action?
I know I present a tennis podcast with you every single week, Devang, and I'm supposed to keep up with it.
This is beginning badly. Uh-oh.
Can I tell you how many minutes of the Davis Cup that I watched and how many highlights I watched this week?
You can.
0 minutes. 0.
Say it. 0. Zero.
Nothing. I don't know why.
We might have to cut this. Leave it in. You know what, Greg? Leave it in. We'll leave this in. I mean, 0. I mean, good for you, though. It sounds like you're living your life. I'm not proud that I watched Felix struggling against South Korea. I don't think that was good time spent. So I think I can understand where you're coming from with this. But Davis Cup action did happen. We do know who will compete in the next stage, the knockout stage. Italy, Spain, Germany, all of the host countries moving on. I wonder if there's some correlation there. Anyways, Netherlands is also through, Croatia, Canada, Australia, and the United States all advancing. In that action, Carlos Alcaraz, for some reason, played. I'm not sure why, after playing for 10,000 hours in New York City. Spain's like, yeah, you know what? We got 80 guys who are fantastic, but you know what, Carlos? Sure. Why not? Play your first match as the world number 1, and Felix Auger-Aliassime beat him. Bush, now I know you didn't watch it. You didn't watch any highlights, but by letter of the law, is Felix not the new number one? Isn't this the way we should do this? WWE belt style?
The open era
AEW belt style, sorry. Yeah, the open era belt.
It passes straight on to Felix Auger-Aliassime. It's been a while since we've had the Canadian player being the world number one, so I am happy to accept it.
So I mentioned the home teams winning. Full disclosure, watched a fair bit of Davis Cup this week, Bush, and I was super jacked for Great Britain, USA, in Scotland, but that match aside, that tie aside, a lot of the crowds were not great. And we had Torquette, who's in Germany, in our Discord telling us about maybe some of the reasons why. So the German leg, or the group hosted by Germany, Torquette mentioning that it was held in an area of northern Germany that's in the fall and an outdoor venue. So it's basically 11 degrees with wind and rain. It's cold as hell. It's not super great to be a spectator. It would explain some of the poor attendance numbers, but I do think it's worth mentioning once again that they really mucked up the Davis Cup. Really killed any sort of goodness that this tournament once had. Don't get me wrong, I know it had problems, and it was not doing super healthy beforehand, before this PK-led group came around, but man, did they suck the joy and life out of this.
Just the fact that it's happening a week removed from the final Grand Slam of the season as well, is there's a level of energy which is required, I think, to watch this sport and be a supporter of the sport in general. And I think that's where this really falls down for me, is that, I mean, me saying I watched 0 minutes of it, I was aware and I chose not to watch it. I chose not to partake in it simply because I just didn't have anything left in me, Dev, to try and watch another boatload of tennis when this is a tournament which in general, I don't think a lot of us have any attachment to anymore. All of it's been sucked out, such to the point where it leaves a bad taste in the mouth, and really, I didn't really want to support it, which I know sounds sad, but it's also kind of true.
The knockout stage is in Malaga, so it's in Spain again, but like, it won't be the same. It won't be the same if Canada beat Germany in a tie, but it was in Montreal or in Vancouver or Toronto. It won't have any sort of vibe to it. There will be none of the hallmarks of past Davis Cup glory that have made it something that it mattered to players. That made it matter to Fed when he won with Switzerland, and how massive that was. Remember that celebration with Stan? It felt huge. It felt important, and it's a shame, I think, where we are today. But yeah, if you are interested, knockout stage, end of November in Malaga. Spain, Croatia is one tie. The Dutch against Australia. Germany, Canada. Italy, United States. That should be interesting. But yeah, so there's your Davis Cup recap. We're not impressed at all.
I will be in Europe at that time. Should I go to the Davis Cup final?
Please, God, all that being said, you have to write this wrong. After outing yourself for not watching 0 minutes, it would be an extreme course of action to then go live to watch.
I'm sure Malaga's nice. South of Spain.
I mean, yeah, there could be worse places to end up, right?
Wait a minute, I could seriously consider this. It's not that far for me. I could easily do this. Anyway, we'll come back to that. We'll park that for a second and quickly touch upon the rising storm, Dev, the inevitability of both Fruhvirtovas winning titles today as we record on Sunday. They are scary good, the pair of them. There is such inevitability about how good the pair of them are going to be. So Brenda Fruhvirtova is 14 years of age. Linda Fruhvirtova is the one that's past it, and she's just 17. Run from it. You can't avoid it. These two are coming, and they are going to probably be at the top of the sport for a very long time, Dev.
So Brenda won in Italy, and Linda, I think Brenda just turned 15, Simon, so her birthday was in April, but Linda won in Chennai. Chennai Open is back, baby. Fantastic. And also, a name to watch for sure. Shouts to Gabriela Dabrowski, Canada's very own, also winning doubles with Luisa Stefani. Glad to see pro tennis in India always. I did find some of the conditions obviously quite tough to watch as a spectator, and being quite concerned regarding the heat. But Genie Bouchard had a run of her own here, Simon, on her way slowly back, very slowly, but like many Westerners going to India to find herself, Jeannie is now on the road up the rankings. Eat, pray, love, baby.
Did this have accompanying pictures on Instagram of her sitting under a waterfall somewhere?
I was afraid. What would be appropriated and where, so I stayed away, Simon, because I didn't want to see something that I didn't have to.
What's Chennai like? I know nothing about it. What part of the country is it?
It's in the southwest, I'd say. So on the coast, very hot. I mean, India's a hot country, but it gets quite toasty. The Bay of Bengal, a hard place to play tennis, and I think the Genie. I'm saying this earnestly. I have all of the respect in the world for someone trying to rediscover or play for the fun of it, or for whatever reason to keep going. Bush, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like everything is made about winning and losing and titles and rankings and all of that, but this is clearly someone who still wants to play tennis, because you're not flying to India to play in this tournament if you don't. So I back this.
As do I, especially the New Balance kit as well. I thought it looked great. Always New Balance bringing it this season. Looked like a good tournament in general to support. I have never asked you this question, Dev, ever. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. If I was going on holiday in India, where should I go?
Oh, well, I mean, I personally would fly into Bombay or Mumbai and go south. I'd stay in Mumbai for a while, but I would go south and maybe even end in Chennai. But I would go through Kerala. I'd stay in Kerala for a while, and I would do that kind of southern horn and come back up to Chennai. I really love the south of India.
I should go at some point, shouldn't I? It does get talked about. I don't know if I've mentioned this on the podcast, but anyway, my partner lived teenage and formative years were all spent in India. She was in an international school in the north of India, just north of Delhi. So wow. I should try and go there at some point.
How did I not know that? Say what? I was gonna say don't go to Delhi is my one advice, but now I feel like Kirsten's already done that.
Yes, the whitest white girl you'll find who is pretty good in Hindi. It's got to be said.
That's always very funny. Well, now I'm upset. I didn't know this, but anyway, I'll save this grievance for off air.
Should we move on quickly?
Please.
To the viewing figures from ESPN's coverage at the US Open. I thought these were interesting just to circle who had the highest viewership. Unsurprisingly, Serena Williams versus Ajla Tomljanovic had the most views, 4.5 million. Pretty much every Serena match was in there. The one that I think circled was interesting was the faux match against Alcaraz, which did nearly 3 million views. Kind of fascinating to see that of which players get the audience. By and large, it's basically American players or... No, it's American players.
Big three plus Serena or American players.
The men's final did 2.1 million. The women's final did 1.7. I think that is a role reversal. I think the last two finals have had more views on the women's side than on the men's. So kind of even in that regard. But it looks like the viewing figures were a little up from what I understand. And Serena Williams probably helped with that.
Anecdotally, my mom was trying to find the men's final last Sunday with NFL starting and it being impossible to find. So that number in itself... I find a bit interesting because it's not bad considering what they're going up against in terms of TV.
Simona Halep's season is over, Devang. She took to Instagram to announce that her 2022 season is done. She also took the opportunity to announce that she's getting a nose job as well, which served a dual purpose of correcting her some breathing issues and also because she wanted it. So absolutely, go ahead with that. I have an interesting story on this. I had a septoplasty done 2 years ago, and I did not know at the time that there was an option for a rhinoplasty to happen until I was sitting in the office with the doctor, and he asked me what changes I wanted to see with my nose. And I just thought he was being really fucking rude, Dev. I quite like my nose.
you're like, excuse me, sir? What did you ask me?
I think I look all right.
That's incredible. That's incredible. Has it helped, though? I mean, like in terms of the airways?
Absolutely, yeah. I think it's most notable when you're playing sport, is that I was basically doing my entire career with not being able to breathe.
Now, I'm no doctor, Simon, but I feel like the ability to breathe is quite important for athletes of this caliber, including Simona Halep. So this sounds like a positive step.
So more power to her. Dominic Thiem was back in the winner's circle this week. He didn't win the tournament that he was entered into, but he did win a series of matches. And I think that stands him in decent stead for next season and maybe the back end of this year as well, because we are entering the part of the season where you'll see a lot of strange winners and you'll see a lot of phoning it in as well from the top 20 as the final Grand Slam of the year has been done. So if there's an opportunity for Thiem to build some confidence up, he had a big win against Hugo Gaston, which I think was the best he'd looked in a long time, but it's good to see him starting to get back. I think he's inside of the top 200 again on merit alone. I think that's what a stat that I saw during the course of the week, so good on him.
He plays Richard Gasquet this week as well, which should be one for the picture book, backhand wise. Finally, we wanted to highlight a listener review we received. Once again, if you could be so kind to rate our show, thank you so much. But also, if you have the time to write in a review, we love it so much. It really warms our hearts. And I mean, we've been doing this for quite a while. And Fed's retirement had me thinking, Simon, about when we started and how far we've come and how many years we've been at this. Reviews like this truly make it worthwhile. So this is from Z Money. Z Money says, Melbourne, Blackjack, quite simply the most witty, amazing, fun tennis podcast ever recorded. These two gentlemen have a different style than any other podcast out there, and I cannot recommend it highly enough. 857 stars, even if they aren't in the cultural zeitgeist as much. Please do more NFTs sometime. Vamos. Thank you, Z Money. There you have it. A request to do more tennis-based NFT talk, Simon. I'm tearing up. I'm happy.
NFT still a thing? I think they're done at this point.
They're way out of the zeitgeist. Z Money's right. They're gone. But remember, never forget, Rafa Nadal won the French Open and then was hawking NFTs seconds after that.
Good Lord, what a strange period of time. That was this year. So much has happened since that point in time.
Shall we conclude with 2 challenges remaining?
Let's do it. Shall I go first?
Please do.
Okay, so I had a couple of things that I wanted to talk about. Where should I start? I'm just going to go with Metal Gear Solid 5 from Hideo Kojima. I'd never played a Metal Gear Solid game in my life. I'd never done this. It's a huge hole in my video game knowledge. I had managed to avoid it somehow, even though I worked at a games company for almost 8 years and basically had played, I think I've played almost every major franchise in my life. I'm pretty sure I'd said that. Anyway, I decided to play Metal Gear Solid 5. It's great. It's really, really good. I understand why people love it. He's a really interesting director. And in general, Dev, I think he's got some really interesting things to say. So I'm glad that I finally caught up with it.
We used to play Metal Gear Solid, like 4 of us, and take turns per turn. Like all of us just watching. That's how obsessed we were.
Really? I didn't know this either.
It's a big deal. That and Resident Evil, I feel like, were the 2 games I played a boatload growing up.
Jesus, I'm learning things about you all the time. This has been an episode of learning about each other.
It's a discovery.
Yeah.
What revelation will come next?
We've only been recording with each other for 4.5 years or whatever it's been. You should probably know everything about each other at this point.
Did you have another one?
I was just going to touch on the fact that I have spoken on my love of Critical Role, the D&D podcast and / Twitch stream before on this show, but I just wanted to talk about the absurdity that what happens with when certain characters do actions in this game in the last couple of weeks of the fandom just going into complete meltdown with some very dramatic actions which have happened inside of this game. It was amazing to watch. And I think anyone who has a level of creativity or wants to get more involved in like creative play in any capacity at any age, you could do yourself a favor and you could grab a couple of friends and play some D&D because it is very, very fun. And I'm glad that it's getting more widespread coverage in general because it's a really cool game.
Fully in the mainstream. I'm curious do you think Stranger Things brought it into the mainstream, or it was already happening beforehand?
I think Stranger Things probably did help a lot with it. I do think Critical Role itself, just the audience that it has, I think it's the highest earning stream on Twitch. So clearly it's got it's got a following in that regard. And I think the game itself, I think 5e, the 5th edition of Dungeons and Dragons, is very accessible, and I think it's really helped. surely the pandemic helped with that, right? Like to have
True.
people locked and wanting to have a way of connecting with each other. So I would guess those three things were the biggest reasons why.
Wonderful. I've been extremely close to canceling random subscriptions I have, Simon, because I'm not watching a lot of them, and I don't know why I'm still subscribed. And when I see that charge on my credit card bill, a small amount of rage builds before it subsides. But I forgot to do the Netflix cancellation and still have it. So I was watching a documentary on the Wirecard scandal in Germany, which I was not familiar with at all, but it was like the German PayPal that was involved in just $1 billion fraud. But that story is not that shocking, I guess, in terms of white collar crime and the amount of things that are stolen and taken in the name of banks, etc. But the way it was told was quite interesting to me. And I think it was the style it was done in and using acting within the documentary and also using comics and trying to make what is an unsexy scandal really better without going outside the material they had at their disposal. And I thought they did a good job at that. So if you got some time to kill, I would recommend watching it.
Bank's bad, everyone. Move your money to a credit union if you can.
Shocker, yeah. That's all I have, Bush. Anything else?
Not for me, no. It's going to be a busy next few weeks as we try and get a few more differing things on the go. Live tennis is beginning to slow down a little bit. We have the tour finals for both the WTA and the ATP and the Laver Cup coming up. So some good stuff.
Laver Cup, get your tissues out. A lot of picks to be had with the big boys in attendance. But we'll be back next week to talk about the Laver Cup. And then after that, some interviews, some deep dives. Stay tuned for more on Open Era. A reminder, we are on patreon.com/Open Era. Join us there. Get the show ad free. Get it early on Sundays. Plus, join us on the Discord where we're chatting tennis all the time with our wonderful friends in there. Truly a wonderful place, in my opinion, to talk tennis and other stuff as well. So join us on patreon.com. Help us keep making the show. We're also on Twitter at OpenEraPod, where we're tweeting all the time about the various things happening in the tennis world. And like I said, be like Z Money. Give us a rating. Give us a review. Means the world to us, really does. So help us out there. And I think that's it for producer Greg on the ones and twos, and for Simon. Thank you so much for listening to Open Era. We'll talk to you next week.